All right. Well, first, very pleased to be here in Niagara Falls, along with my colleagues, MPs Badawey and Bittle, here touring one of our ports of entry, where we've had a chance to see some incredible demonstrations by our frontline officers at the CBSA. Among the things that we were able to observe this morning were the exceptionally and well-trained canine units in Tiva, who was conducting a sample search here of a vehicle, and as well some of the X-ray technology that is dispatched pretty much on a daily, if not hourly basis, to interdict and find illegal contraband like guns. And you'll see right behind us that the CBSA officers have put on display a number of handguns which were seized by them as a result of their hard work and as a result of the federal investments that we have been making in the CBSA over the last number of years in the hundreds of millions of dollars to ensure that they've got the resources that they need, the technology that they need, the tools that they need to stop guns from illegally entering into Canada. I want to commend the team here in Niagara Falls for the extraordinary work. They seized about 30% of the total number of illegal guns in 2021, and indeed 2021 was a record year for illegal firearm seizures. But there's still a lot more work to do, and that's why we're going to continue to invest in CBSA. We're going to continue to find ways to support the frontline officers who work at our ports of entry, not only here in Niagara Falls and in Ontario, but right across the country. And indeed, I've been touring from coast to coast to see this work firsthand. I think it's really important that Canadians know that the federal government does see as a priority the need to stop illegal trafficking of guns at our borders, and that's precisely what we saw again this morning. Taking a step back, this has to be one of three pillars when it comes to reducing gun violence in Canada. So first, continuing to invest in law enforcement in our CBSA at our borders to stop illegal trafficking of guns. Second, we need to make sure that we are preventing gun crime from occurring in the first instance, and that is something that we're doing with the rollout of the Building Safer Communities Fund. This is a $250 million fund that gets at root causes through partnerships with local and grassroots organizations who know best how to put tangible, concrete solutions to give more capacity to those communities and those young people especially who are at risk. And I look forward to exploring those opportunities to leverage that fund here in the Niagara Falls region, the Halton region, right across to Ontario. And beyond that, the third pillar is making sure that we pass smart, common sense laws like Bill C-21. And at the end of June, I was very pleased, along with colleagues in government, to table that legislation, which will do three things. First, it will introduce a national handgun freeze. And again, you can see the need to do that right here behind us. Handguns are the #1 type of guns used in homicides. It's a type of gun that has been growing on average between 45 and 55,000 new registrations each and every year. And we want to stop that trend, and we hope that by doing so, we'll bring down handgun violence, which sadly has been on the rise. The second thing Bill C-21 will do is it will give more tools to law enforcement, including wiretapping powers to stop the flow of illegal guns across our borders, as well as raising maximum sentences. So if you're in the business of organized crime, if you're in the businesses of trying to terrorize our communities with guns and with gun violence, you face stiffer sentences. And then third and finally, Bill C-21 will introduce red flag laws. And what this aims to do is to reverse the trend in the connection between domestic violence and the presence of guns, which again has been going up at an alarming rate, certainly between 2013 and 2019, over 30%. And by allowing people to go to a court, to go to a judge, to say to that judge, look, the person who owns this gun poses a threat to either themselves or somebody else, we think that's another tool that will help women who are disproportionately victimized by gun violence. So there are some very concrete and tangible tools which are being advanced by Bill C-21. I'm going to continue to work with parliamentarians of every stripe to see that that law is passed as quickly as possible. Last spring, we were making some really good headway with negotiations and solid dialogue in the NDP and in the Bloc Québécois. Regrettably, it was only the Conservatives who were filibustering and who were delaying passage of that bill. And I think it's really important that we move past talking points, that we move past some of the old stereotypes around this discussion and get to the merits of debating this bill so that we can put it into law and save lives. That's the focus. And in the meantime, we're not resting on our laurels. Minister Joly and I, a little less than 2 weeks ago, announced a temporary measure in the form of a ban of future importation of handguns going forward. We see this as a measure that will help us get closer to the ultimate goal of Bill C-21, which is a national handgun freeze, and we'll continue to exhaust all options to save lives. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I mean, indeed, this is probably one of the most pernicious and complex issues that we confront. But what we have before us is a comprehensive strategy to tackle it head on. And I do want to take a moment to thank both Chris and Vance for the extraordinary advocacy that they bring on this subject. We know that gun violence is a top priority right across the country, including in southwestern Ontario, and especially if you live in a border community where you know the community is at risk, our frontline border officers who work for the CBSA at risk, everyone is at risk. And what we're here today to see is just how important it is that the government continues to support the efforts at stopping illegal trafficking here in Niagara Falls, and you can see the progress of that work right behind us. So again, thank you to Chris and Vance for joining, and happy to take any questions.
Can you provide more Can you provide more details on the restrictions? I guess they're coming into place in just a few days, August 19th.
So in short, these are authorities that will be exercised by Minister Joly under the portfolio of Global Affairs Canada. There is an import-export law that allows her to put on a list things which are regulated that have to meet certain regulatory standards or restrictions. And what she has done, again in close coordination with my portfolio, is put handguns on the list of importation regulations that will be prohibited going forward. So as a result of that, it will be impossible for anyone to import a handgun into Canada except if they fall into some very narrow exemptions. For example, if you work in law enforcement or if you work in a security sector that is designed to protect certain critical infrastructure within the country, there will be exemptions for that. But beyond that, this will serve as an important temporary measure that will have the desired impact of getting us closer to the national handgun freeze. And the reason why that is important is, first and foremost, as I said, handgun violence has been on the rise dramatically over the course of the last number of years. And so we want to stop that trend. We want to reverse that trend. And, you know, you can see behind us that the demonstration includes all handguns here. I mean, this is a product of the good work that is being done by our frontline CBSA officers. So it's important that we put a stop to this trend, and it will be coming into force as of August 19th, which is this Friday.
And just further on the handgun freeze, we do see statistics coming out though that do suggest many of the guns involved in crimes here within this country are smuggled across borders like the one we're standing at right now. So why go ahead with a full freeze on a handgun ban when you're seeing, I think Tracy Tom sent me a statistic that was 90% of the guns being used in crimes are actually illegal here?
Well, for two simple reasons. First, every single illegal gun that we take off the streets is one less gun that can do harm. And secondly, frankly, we're seeing a spike in gun violence this summer. And it happens almost every summer where we see an increase in gun violence, and as a result, you see more lives that are being either injured or lost altogether. And frankly, that's unacceptable. We can't just accept that the status quo will continue to go on forever. We've got to put a stop to it. And I had the chance to meet with the chiefs of police right across the country last week in Quebec at their annual conference. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police has said that Bill C-21, which includes the national handgun freeze, is a step in the right direction. It is another measure that will protect communities from gun violence. And so with their cooperation, with the cooperation of the CBSA, we want to see the objective of the national handgun freeze put into effect as quickly as possible. But we're not going to wait. We're going to continue to exhaust every single option on the table, and that's why we worked very closely with Global Affairs to put this temporary ban of importing handguns into place so that we can move the needle, so that we can save lives. That's why we took that decision.
Vance Badawey with the Niagara Falls Review. How much input did the Canada Border Services Agency have in some of this legislation and the bills that you've brought forward? Is there a lot of dialogue with these folks here?
So we're in constant contact with CBSA, and I obviously have a dialogue with the president of the CBSA, and we get input not only on the kinds of legal measures that we're putting into place, but as well with regards to resourcing, with regards to the kind of technology that is being deployed on a daily basis. And what's really important is that we continue to support the CBSA in their efforts to stop illegal contraband from coming into the country, whether we're talking about guns or drugs or indeed human trafficking, whether on land or on water or at our airports of entry. And so one of the reasons why I do these tours is to talk to frontline officers, to also get their raw feedback on what we need to do more of. So the engagement is not only at the executive level, it also occurs right here on the streets of communities like here in Niagara Falls.
We're seeing in Niagara specifically half a dozen or so reported crimes related to guns. Is that another example? I mean, Niagara's always seen as a safe place to live. It still is to a degree, but we're seeing this problem exacerbated. So is that another reason why these laws and the bills are necessary?
Sure, Niagara Falls is a safe city, and we thank not only the members of CBSA, but local police and all law enforcement for the extraordinary job that they do. But the fact of the matter is that gun violence is a reality, and the trends are moving in the wrong direction, and they have been moving in the wrong direction for a number of years. And it's my job as Minister of Public Safety to make sure that we're equipping law enforcement, CBSA, local police, as well as federal police and the RCMP with the tools, the resources, and the technology that they need. What we saw this morning is a demonstration of how that resourcing is being put to good use. Every single one of the illegal guns that is sitting on that table right behind us is no longer accessible to a criminal who can terrorize a community or who can do harm to an individual or who can take somebody's life. And it's really urgent work. I mean, this is not something that we have the luxury of just sort of sitting on our hinds on. We have to really be forward-leaning. We've got to be proactive. We've got to continue to invest, and we've got to do those three things. We've got to pass smart, common sense laws like Bill C-21. We've got to continue to invest in law enforcement at the border and in our communities, which we're doing. And we have to prevent gun crime from starting in the first place. And the way that we can do that is by partnering with communities who are at risk, who can get at the root causes, who can reduce some of the barriers, who can give greater access to programming, to services, to safe, inclusive spaces, so that we can empower young people to make the right choices, so that they don't go down a darker path and choose organized crime where they may have exposure to a gun, so that instead they continue to pursue their careers, they can pursue their education and be positive contributing members to society. And it is only if we do all of those three things, if we support a strategy with those three pillars, that will eradicate gun violence.
Matt Ingram, CHCH News. Minister, you keep talking about the urgency of the situation. I'm curious, has the government done any research or have any idea of how quickly people on the streets can see a reduction in gun violence from the changes being proposed under Bill C-21 and other changes your government are making?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think we can look at a couple of metrics. First, how are we doing in terms of the statistics around gun violence? How are we doing vis-a-vis the statistics around homicides? And trust me, I watch those statistics very closely. I know that my colleagues in law enforcement watch those statistics very, very closely as well. One of the things that's harder to measure is how many lives you're saving, how many more lives are being protected as a result of those measures. But what I think we can't do is continue to defend the status quo. And that's why it is regrettable when we hear conservatives sort of resort to the same old talking points, who resort to blocking the passage of Bill C-21. And there was filibustering when we tabled that legislation at the end of June. There was filibustering when we tried to get some of the temporary measures that Minister Joly and I put into place through some very innovative thinking, quite frankly, as opposed to putting in place the amendments to the regulations under the Firearms Act so that we could stop more gun violence from occurring, specifically as it relates to handguns, and save lives. And so what I think you will continue to see from our government and from our team and from our caucus, and I know that Vance and Chris share the sentiment, is that we're going to press forward. We're going to exhaust all options. we're going to continue to advocate for the passage of Bill C-21. We're going to continue to call on all parliamentarians to support the investments of federal government in frontline law enforcement, including for the CBSA. And we're going to continue to roll out our Building Safer Communities Fund so that we can stop gun crime from occurring in the first instance.
So the metrics are difficult, to tell if this is going to work or not. Why do a handgun ban when most of the deaths from crime are coming from smuggled handguns? Why not just focus all your efforts on supporting CBSA at the border?
Well, I think that is precisely the trap that we can fall into, and that is you pick one lane. So some of our political opponents, like the Conservatives, would say, well, just invest at the border. Well, that's not good enough. You have to invest in the border and also pass smart, common sense laws like Bill C-21. And the reason why we believe that a national handgun freeze will work is that over the last decade, you've seen the universe of handguns explode by about 45 to 55,000 new registrations every year. And every year over the last decade, you have seen at the same time an explosion in the degree to which handguns are causing violence in our streets, are causing the loss of life. Handguns are now the #1 type of gun used in homicides across the country. I don't believe that is a coincidence. There is a correlation there. And so by stopping the trend of the growth of that type of gun in this country, it is our firm belief, backed by the advice and the perspectives of law enforcement, including the Canadian Association of the Chiefs of Police, that with this national handgun freeze, we'll have another protection in place to ensure that fewer handguns are falling into the hands of criminals, and that can then cause a loss of life. That's unacceptable. And that's why it's important that we not just pick one lane, but that we rather take a comprehensive strategy that advances with those 3 pillars.
And last, if I can see just one more in, Minister, what do you have to say to Canada's firearms industry that, is clearly speaking out against this handgun ban and concerned that it could, essentially destroy the industry? We're seeing people rushing to get handguns right now, clearing out store shelves in the GTA. What do you have to say to that industry? And is there concern that, that industry may entirely suffer from this?
Well, first thing I would say is that we are in dialogue with the industry and the firearms sector, and that includes not only on the implementation of the national handgun freeze, but on the mandatory buyback program that we are rolling out as it relates to the national ban on assault-style rifles, which we put into place about 2 years ago. Just to recap, these are assault-style rifles that exert the greatest amount of lethal force in the shortest period of time, and that have been used in some of the worst shooting tragedies in our country, including in Ontario, including in my hometown on the Danforth, but right across the country. So we are in dialogue with the firearms sector, and of course we do respect those law-abiding citizens who participate in hunting, in recreational sports shooting, and for those for whom this is an important tradition, and we've heard about that. But this is not about attacking, as we've heard from our Conservative opponents, those individuals at all. I mean, the purpose of Bill C-21 is to save lives. And we need to make sure that we are exhausting all those options and doing it in conjunction and in dialogue with the firearms industry, which we are in the course of doing, and we will continue to make sure that we keep those channels open so that we can see our agenda implemented in a way that is responsible and safe and respectfully. And I know that is something that we're committed to, but at the same time, we can't tolerate the status quo, and that's why we have put in place the strategy that we have.
Can we maybe get a comment from Chris
Yeah,
or
please,
Vance
by all
on the
means.
situation here in Niagara, gun violence, and what you think needs to be done to curb the problem in our local area?
Good.
Oh, me? Okay. Thanks, Vance. Excuse me, take a moment. As the Minister said, we need investments. We saw from the previous government cuts at CBSA, cuts at the RCMP, and for the last number of years we've refunded that, building back the capacity at the border. But there's a lot of organizations that Vance and I see in Niagara, there's organizations across Southern Ontario that help young people, and that can really, if we invest in the root causes of crime, and even beyond that, in poverty, homelessness, housing, it's a broad solution that needs to be addressed across the board, and that's something that we've done in terms of poverty reduction, housing, but also focusing on the direct root causes of crime. $250 million investing in organizations is going to go a long way. Greater investments at the border is important not only for communities here in Niagara, but across southern Ontario, because the 4 ports of entry here are significant conduits into Toronto and across the province. And so the 3 pillars that the minister talked about are fundamentally important to see that gun violence reduced, not just in Toronto, but across the country and in regions like Niagara. Awesome.
Well, thank you for the question. It's, and I don't want to repeat what was already said by both the Minister and MP Bittle, but it's a multi-pronged approach. And having sat on the Police Services Board for 12 years in my former life, we understand the need for one partnership between all levels of policing and law enforcement, between CBSA, the RCMP, the local detachment here in the Niagara region, Niagara Regional Police. But it's not just about the borders. It's not just about the land borders. We're talking about airports and other points of entry as well, including the lakes and the rivers. And we have some work to do. You know, I think today we recognize that although CBSA is working extremely hard with the resources that are being provided to them by the federal government, there's more work to do and more investments that have to be made. And that plugs the gaps and ensures that those cracks that we see within the system, not only here at the land borders, but also in other points of entry, such as the lakes and the rivers, pertinent here to the Niagara region, have to be dealt with as well. So again, we have lots of work to do. Chris mentioned about really ensuring that those pillars are adhered by, and ensuring that we have the safer communities, and we're working with communities to ensure the next generations don't end up in that line of crime. And therefore, we have to start there and ensure that those future generations have a path to walk on. But again, what we're dealing with here today in 2022 and leading into the future, we have to work hard. We have to resource better and ensure that all the points of entries are, and the gaps that are existing within those points of entries are plugged up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks. Awesome. Well dressed.
Yeah,
well dressed.
that's right.
Great.
Yeah.
You got to tell you.
He got the memo.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe I should
Thank you very much,
so that way
guys.
it splits you up.
Thanks.
Eh?
Absolutely.